Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online, you're now watching The Kevin Moore Show. Now on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guests, Dr. Eben Alexander and Karen Newell. Now Dr. Eben Alexander is the author of the international phenomena, Proof of Heaven. Now he shares the next phase of his journey to understand the true nature of consciousness and how to cultivate a state of harmony with the universe and our higher purpose. Dr. Eben Alexander and Karen Newell, welcome to the show.
Well, Kevin, it's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks.
Well, thank you guys for coming on. I really do appreciate that. Now, you've come on to discuss your latest book, Living in a Mindful Universe. Now, what is the leap from obviously your near-death experience and then obviously collaborating together on a book like this?
Well, near-death experiences are kind of the tip of the spear. They tell us that there is something going on about consciousness, brain, and mind where we need a bigger theater of operations to understand it all. So as a scientist, having a profound near-death experience back in 2008 really rocked my boat. I fully believed, like many scientists do, before my coma, that the brain creates consciousness. And what my coma journey showed me very clearly is that is not true. The consciousness is fundamental. It is something that exists, and the brain works as a filter, reducing valve, to allow that primordial consciousness to manifest in this world. Well, what I started realizing in the first year or two after my coma is to have any deeper understanding of the nature of my experience, I needed a much broader understanding of the nature of consciousness, and of the mind-brain connection. And I was coming to realize that the conventional scientific model, which is based on the assumptions of what are known as physicalism or materialism, that is, that only the physical world exists, are completely false. And in understanding something as profound as consciousness, we really need to go deeper. So it's no surprise that materialist science studying the material world has always, kind of believed based on a built-in assumption that the brain must be creating consciousness. But that's why they hit such absolute turmoil around all these examples of near-death experiences, shared death experiences, deathbed visions, and stories of after-death communications, as well as past life memories in children indicative of reincarnation. All of these bodies of evidence very strongly point us towards the need for a much richer and deeper understanding of the nature of consciousness. And so this book, Living in a Mindful Universe, really represents my first decade of trying to understand this kind of experience. I mean, my experience is one of millions out there. There are many, many people who have had these experiences from all cultures going back thousands of years. And so what we now have to do is start understanding how they can have a real basis. The me before coma, conventional scientist, just debunked and denied it all, said it can't be true because it doesn't fit the model. Well, in science, we truly should look at the evidence and let that lead us to our conclusions and not be constrained by a restrictive, false model like that of materialism. And that's what this newest book is all about, is the much bigger version of understanding consciousness and how all the many lines of evidence support not only the reality of an afterlife, but also that we are reincarnated, and that's part of the big package.
And again, all these truths that you state in this book are examples from your experience when you crossed over to some other dimension.
Well, no, this book, Living in a Mindful Universe, is a very scientific book. It looks at many other experiences, not just mine. Mine happened to really, shake my cage to a point where I had to open my mind to bigger possibilities. But if I were the only one in history to ever have had such a profound spiritual experience, that would pretty much be the end of the story. But that's not the case. Millions and millions of souls going back thousands of years have had similar experiences. So Living in a Mindful Universe is really looking at the scientific study of the nature of consciousness. And you really must address quantum physics. As much as many people don't want to hear that, they would like to think that they left quantum physics behind in high school or college. But the reality is, quantum physics is the deepest form of the mind-body question. And that's why the findings of quantum physics are so relevant. And they are leading us into a new science which acknowledges the fundamental nature of consciousness and completely allows for the realities of concepts like the afterlife and of reincarnation.
And Karen, don't worry, I've not ignored you right now, but Karen, let me just bring you into this conversation as well. What is your contribution towards this book as well?
Well, it's really interesting because it goes all the way back to when Eben and I first met, actually. And when we met, I knew he had had a near-death experience, but this was before he even had an agent to have a book published about it. So it was nowhere in the public realm at this point. But I was curious because I had met other people who'd had near-death experiences, and I knew they always came back with some really profound lesson. And so I was curious, making conversation, and I said to him, what was the most important thing you learned during your near-death experience? And he looks at me with great intensity and says, the brain doesn't create consciousness. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And I actually said to him, why would anyone think that it does? And I was coming from a completely different worldview, one in which mind has great power over our unfolding reality. And that was how I'd been living my life, very happily and satisfactorily. So it kind of surprised me that someone was just coming around to figuring that out. And it was interesting because it wasn't really a spiritual lesson. And of course, he learned many deep spiritual lessons. But the most important thing was, how can we spread the word that our materialist mainstream science is wrong? And we, had many conversations around all of this, and the idea that I was already living kind of the new worldview he was just really discovering really brought an interesting contrast to our conversations, and that's what eventually ended up coming out in the book. It's all written in Eben's first-person voice, just for ease of the reader. But many of the ideas are things that I and Eben discussed together in great depth. And it's very hard, I think, for someone who comes from that materialist viewpoint in the secular world. And what happens is they begin to think that it's truth, that science has proven all of these things, that the material world is all that exists. And when someone like that starts to, I hate to use the word awaken, but it really is awakening to a broader worldview, it's just the same as, say, a fundamentalist religious person who is just realizing that maybe the dogma they learned in their particular religion may not be speaking all of the truth. It's really interesting to watch people come out of these belief systems and kind of open their eyes to brand new kind of concepts. And that's what we together kind of explore in the book.
So in the book then, for you both, and either one of you can answer this, you've both contributed in your own way together. Karen, I'm guessing you're more from the sort of spiritual side of it, maybe, to where Eben was a few years ago. So you've helped sort of, ground him in that. And Eben, I'm guessing you've helped ground Karen into the more science stuff as well. So between you both, it's a good combination. And I'm guessing the contents in this book is really, well, okay, so I have a near-death experience. So what? So what? It's really about, well, if you've had a near-death experience, what is some of that teaching information that came from having that experience can you apply into someone's life right now? Is that not what it's all about?
That's pretty much it. I mean, near-death experiences in many ways are the kind of tip of the spear that awakens humanity to a lesson that we've been charged and tasked to learn for at least 2,000 years. And that is a lesson of love. That is a lesson of compassion and kindness, that we're all in this together. And the reason it's kind of the scientific angle is so important is what is really being suggested by both the deepest findings of quantum physics and these extraordinary human experiences, is that in essence, we're all really sharing one mind. When we die, our soul kind of reunites with our higher soul, and that involves the life review, where we go through the main events of our lives that still offer some mode of teaching to us. And for example, for someone who's been busy handing out pain and suffering to someone else their whole life, they have to feel that in their life review. It's kind of a course corrective mechanism once you understand that the scientific evidence for reincarnation is very strong. So It's really just a lesson that we've all been challenged to learn. And although some facets of our world are getting better, there are many parts of our world that are getting worse, like the rising rate of suicide and depression in our country, the opiate crisis. These are horrific challenges that are greatly impacting our very mortality rates. And I would say that much of that kind of rise in depression and suicide comes from the false sense of separation that is engendered in materialist science, the very notion that we're all separate from each other, whereas near-death experiencers come back broadly having experienced that oneness of connection, and that binding force is one of love. We're not here to be in conflict. We're not here to see who can accumulate the most material toys during this one little lifetime, birth to death and nothing more, because we're all something far greater than that. We have many lifetimes, but it's all in a process of growth, of becoming more and more altruistic, philanthropic, of taking care of the least, the last, and the lost. That is really what humanity is charged with. And the false notion of separatism that comes from materialist science, and the secularism that also is kind of tends to put us as isolated from each other and isolated from any divine purpose or core love of this universe, those are very damaging factors. And that's why through both quantum physics and through extraordinary human experiences like near-death experiences, it's important for us to realize we're all in this together. And it's about how we live these lives that is important. It's not, the big question is not what happens when we die, because I think when you study evidence, what you'll find is when we die, we actually come out of the prison of our physical brain, reunite with our higher soul. Our awareness becomes far greater, not far less, as we're reunited with that higher soul and with our beloved souls of beloved departed. And all of that is in the setting of that life review.
Yes.
And every bit of it is so that we can then fashion the challenges for that next life. And those who really want to learn more, and certainly in terms of the reincarnation work, I would recommend you look at the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies website. And they've done an incredible job over 60 years, accumulated more than 2,700 cases of past life memories in children, where the most ready explanation is of actual reincarnation. And they've done a very good job of protecting against fraud and any kind of deception in these studies. And when you look at the volume of data, first from Ian Stevenson and more recently from Dr. Jim Tucker, it's just overwhelming. There's no way to think this is some mass conspiracy or some mass delusion. What we're talking about here is the reality of eternity of consciousness, and that we are on a much bigger mission than could be visualized just by looking at one birth to death incarnation.
Well, yes,
and
because, well, yeah, I mean, let me just butt in here. I mean, when I was doing my channeling documentary, one of the main messages coming through that from the 89-ish or something like that channelers that I met was that we live in a multidimensional reality, and that we're constantly shifting our perception into different realities. It's our consciousness that's shifting, not the physical body. And that you know, all past lives, future lives, they're all happening at once. That it's not just, you know, in any sequential order. They're all happening now, and they're affecting each other as well.
Well, there is a tremendous overlap and interaction there, and to say it all happens at once is a little kind of misleading. Not misleading, it's just that it gives one a headache more than it helps to explain anything. But the way I look at it, there is something known as deep time. We have apparent time flow in this earthly realm, but that is all part of the stage setting. This is the stage on which that drama of human experience unfolds. And that kind of ordering of earth time helps to organize things for our kind of thinking and understanding in this very limited context of being incarnate in a physical form. But in fact, when we reunite with the higher soul in the setting of the life review and in those spiritual realms, deep time is more the ordering of causality. It completely trumps any kind of earth time. And from that perspective, you can see how earth time is set up as the stage for this drama, but that there's a much richer version of causality and an increase of knowledge, of understanding that occurs more in that spiritual realm. That's something I call deep time. And we explain that very much in Living in a Mindful Universe. And I think that basically kind of is in agreement with a lot of what you were just pointing out.
Yeah, one of my things was, I on this documentary as well, I was trying to link that where channelers go to, that it's the same space as a regressionist takes a client to. It's the same space as when someone has a near-death experience. It's all the same space. Do you know that we separate these fields? Like we separate channeling from near-death, we separate near-death from regression work, we separate
Right.
regression work from psychic work, we separate psychic work from, whatever it may be, maybe astrology even, perhaps, right? I don't know if they'll be in the same box, but do you know what I mean? We've done a very good job as a community of separation. And actually, to me, it seems to be it's all the same space. No one owns this space. It's just we're very good at separating it because we don't want to, go into different realms sometimes because it dilutes the work we're doing. But I think it's all the same.
It is all the same. And the other aspect of that is that we can also intentionally go there through a practice of meditation. And one thing that I wanted to bring up about the purpose of our book is very related to this. The idea that our awareness continues beyond physical death has rather scientifically been proven, even though it hasn't been embraced and accepted by the materialist faction, which seems to have so much power. It has been scientifically shown that our awareness continues beyond death. This is big news to everyone on the planet. What happens here matters. It's not that it's all just going to end when our physical body dies and, okay, oh, well, it doesn't matter. We can do whatever we want. We can do whatever we want. We will continue. And so we can all get in touch with that awareness. That awareness is not the consciousness that, is thinking and talking and analyzing and rationalizing. The awareness that exists beyond the physical death of the body is the observer behind all of that, the quiet voice within that we can all get to through meditation, that your channelers access when they go into channeling state, that near-death experience people access, hypnosis people, just like you said. We can all get to that state simply by quieting that, voice of the ego, the constant thoughts going within. And the more of us who can do this and get in touch with that observer behind it all, that's how we connect to the one mind that Eben's talking about. The mindful universe that we're all a part of is connected, and we all can access it, just like your channelers and NDEs. Average people, through a practice of meditation, can start to get to know that consciousness from within.
Karen's making a very crucial point, and I think many of your listeners can probably identify with this. As an academic neurosurgeon, 15 years of experience at Harvard Medical School, I thought I had a good idea of how brain, mind, and consciousness work. But that rational mind, that logical, linguistic brain, is it really kind of draws attention to itself as the dominant line of kind of understanding and conceptual flow. But much of what we're talking about is knowledge that is more readily available to your conscious awareness. And I love the way Michael Singer puts it in his book, The Untethered Soul. He calls that voice in the head the annoying roommate. And that is a very important concept, is to realize you are not that little voice in your head. You are not the voice of your ego. Your ego would rather see you dead than see itself dead. That's what we see in addiction and alcoholism work all the time, where the demands of the ego basically make it so that to satisfy that ego, sometimes people end up dying from their addiction or alcoholism before they can do it. So don't look at that voice in the head, which is the same voice as we use for logical and rational communication, but it can trick us into believing things that are not necessarily true. And that's why going within, especially as Karen and I discuss in the book Living in a Mindful Universe and share in many of our meditation play shops, is building up and strengthening that connection with higher soul, with that observer within, and acknowledging the little voice in our head, voice of the ego that uses fear and anxiety as its main tools. That is little more than a parlor trick. And that is something we can all put into time out. And we can start to unite with our higher soul, which is exactly what happens when we die. That's what near-death experiences are describing, is reuniting with our higher soul. And the incredible ultra-reality and meaning and purpose and vibrancy that is part of that process. And yet there is also a process of programmed forgetting. That's why in this whole setting of reincarnation and past life memories in children indicative of reincarnation, you've got to check with a child between ages 2 and 6, because outside of that age range, there are processes that start to take over that are programmed forgetting. We are not meant to come into this world and fully remember everything that our higher souls know. A lot of that forgetting comes as we enter the body in the first place, but then those memories are still accessible in young children, but then they lose it. And there's a reason for that. This veil is here for a purpose. We're not supposed to have full, complete access to all the knowledge of our higher soul, although we can learn much more about it through meditation. And that's why Karen and I in this book, Living in a Mindful Universe, provide a very practical and strong program of going within using differential frequency sounds for brain entrainment, which intercepts consciousness at a very primitive level in the lower brainstem. And that's why I think it is so astonishingly effective. And that's why I encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about that to visit sacredacoustics.com. Karen has a free download there, plus a lot of free training videos to help people get started in this process.
Yeah, and we're linking both your websites and your books on the screen as we're talking right now. And thank you for just mentioning that for the podcast as well. So, yeah, you know, some people in a lot of pain, you know, are in that much pain, they can't even think of meditating. It's not even in their realm of wanting to try. Something blocks them. And most of the things we're talking about they'll probably just turn off or turn away from, because they're out of their remit of their ability to even understand right now, because they're just not in that space. Some people, it seems, never get to these subjects we're discussing right now and go through a lifetime of pain. Maybe the only time they'll really see some of the things we're discussing is the moment that they take their last breath and they reconnect with their higher self. Maybe they have the free will not to look at any of these subjects in this lifetime.
Well, I think it's really important to point out that this really speaks to the problem in our society in general, that people could live their entire life denying the existence of their higher soul and denying their ability to interact with it and have some influence over their lives. There are people in pain, and it's really a tragedy to see that they're, you know, throughout the world denying the reality of this worldview that we're talking about. And it really speaks to the importance of beginning to educate people at a very young age and integrate into our schools and just make it common knowledge. It's common. What's common knowledge now is a falsehood. The common knowledge that the physical is all that exists, and that our bodies, when we die, our awareness disappears and is gone forever. That's a falsehood. And so what you're saying really speaks to the damage that that falsehood has done to the people in our world. And so the more we can try to change that worldview from kind of the grassroots up, starting with children and people like us who do know how this works, we can model how to do it. And it's so important for us to change people fundamentally before they get into pain, before people get into pain, so that when things like that start to happen, they're equipped with tools to deal with it in a much different way that can hopefully be more effective than what our tools have been up until now.
And one other thing I would point out, you're talking about they're being in so much pain they might not be able to participate in this meditation. I would say that's all the more reason to go right to the meditation, because so much of that pain is something that comes from our ego and its kind of sense of fear and anxiety, and how it kind of leads us down into this dark hole of despair. And yet, for example, we just heard a few weeks ago from someone who was an acupuncturist using these tones in the setting of children who had attempted suicide. And she was using these tones to kind of help in soothing their emotional pain, because that's something we've observed that these tones have a power to do. And what she described was that some of the children hearing those tones were saying, I wish I had heard this before. I never would have tried to kill myself. Mm-hmm. So in other words, people need to realize that getting in touch with your higher soul and putting that little limiting voice of false beliefs, the voice of the ego, into timeout where it belongs, and allowing your conscious awareness to become more unified with your higher soul in the universe is a very healing maneuver. It's something that helps us to align with our true purpose, find that our current life situation in many ways, and we might be looking at aspects of it as hardness and challenges and difficulties, and yet in many ways they can be gifts to serve as engines to drive our growth as souls. And that's very much what this kind of use of meditation and going within can help people do to overcome that kind of psychological pain that results with conflicts with their ego.
Well, what about this as well? For example, right, I mean, okay, so I've been on the road 190 days, seen, over 80 plus, channelers. And throughout doing this show since 2008, I mean, I've interviewed you guys before. I've done a lot of different interviews in this field. And I know that doing this show was not just for the audience, it's for me and my spiritual growth as well. But, since getting back to the UK, I've been in so much pain, internal monkey noise and everything else in my head, really depressed about a lot of things, right? And it was whilst working on my next documentary, interviewing a guy in prison and interviewing for the past couple of weeks, a guy called Crossan, and listening to his story for this next documentary, recording it. And he set me free. It was him that I told him on the phone, I said, if you want to know who you've helped so far, you've helped me. You've become my greatest spiritual teacher to realize how free that I am. And your being locked up for 36 years taught me and removed the monkey noise, removed all my pain, and just removed everything within me that was suffering. And I'm just such a different person right now. So
wow, that's a beautiful story that shows how the hardships, in many ways, are kind of manufactured, and we need to see how they can be friends, they can be guides. It's the challenges that they offer. It's our ability to rise above those challenges and to find the happiness, the completeness, to become more whole in spite of it all. That is, I think, such an important lesson. And your story that you just shared is a beautiful example of that, of how our culture is kind of very mixed up about what happiness is, sadness, free will versus being incarcerated. And so many of us are incarcerated in the false belief system of materialism. And that's a very depressing and bleak world to live in. And yet the truth supports the opposite.
That
is what we're trying to share with this world.
Yeah, that is true. That is true, because I think knowing that he had nothing and I could just even go out for a walk and I could have kids one day if someone's, if the right lady turns up for that, right? But do you know what I mean? He can't even do that. He can't even have a family. He can't even go to the shop. He can't do nothing. And I'm not saying I forgive him for what he's done, for being there, but it was a complete revelation. And I don't know, some of us, you're right, because someone else that came to me really recently was so upset on the phone that she had everything, materialism, but she was absolutely destroyed from within just right now.
Well, and that speaks to the suicide rate that we keep hearing about celebrities, but there's also a very high rate of non-celebrities continuing to take their own lives. And it's so surprising when it happens to the celebrities, because we think they have everything they need. They must be happy because they're famous, they have money, people love them. What could possibly be wrong? And what happens is people try to fill their inner spiritual holes with material matter, and you cannot fill spiritual holes with material matter. You can only fill spiritual holes with spiritual matter. And because we've taken spirituality out of our culture, especially in the Western world, as something that's for the religious folks over there, it's separate, that serves a lot of good purposes on one fashion, but on the other hand, we've stripped all sense of spirituality from our culture. And unless you're kind of on the fringes and bravely, continue your spiritual practice, they don't talk about it on the news. They don't talk about it on regular television, the importance of going within. And yet that is the most important thing we all can do.
And I would say from our point of view, spirituality has a fairly simple definition. It really just involves two main qualities. One is a sense of connectedness. As I said earlier, the scientific evidence really indicates that we are all working with one mind, one God consciousness. And it's not just humans. It's all life throughout the cosmos that is sharing this kind of one mind, because we're all in the process of growth, of learning, of knowledge, of understanding about our existence and our relationship with this universe and our oneness with this universe. So the first quality of spirituality is that sense of the one mind and our connectedness to it. The other is a very deep sense of purpose and meaning to our lives, that we're here for a reason. And that's why I think this expanded view and realizing that consciousness is fundamental in the universe is so important, because it really brings back to the fore the importance that each and every one of us serves as a sentient being in this universe, in contributing to the overall evolution of consciousness. Every one of us is important in that journey. And it's that sense of connectedness that serves as a strong antidote to that suicide epidemic and to the rising sense of depression that comes from a false sense of separation.
And I'd like to point out, you mentioned that just listening to the guy who can't get out, who can't, be out in the world and all the various things he's restricted from doing, turned you to somehow feeling gratitude. You didn't use that word, but you were explaining that you were grateful for all of the freedom and things you have. And gratitude is such a basic kind of emotion that all of us can benefit from. Even when you're in deep despair, there's always something you can be grateful for that somebody else doesn't have.
I was grateful for the small bank balance I had. I was grateful for my little niece that I'm living with just right now. I was grateful for my family and their support. I was grateful for my friends. I was grateful for just being able to walk outside. Right?
Yeah.
Absolute gratefulness. Yet sometimes, this is not for everyone though, because there is a great majority on the planet where I could walk out my room now and they will not understand what I'm talking about. So this isn't a field, this isn't, as much as we would like to enlighten everyone with the perspective that the soul is so much bigger than you could even imagine, and that's the main message of any documentary I'd work on as well. It's not for everyone. It was like when I was in the UFO field, a complete different field to where me and you are right now, right? But you get out of it, you think it's massive inside, but you get out of it and it's tiny.
Well, I think that's part of the problem with our modern civilization, though, is that, if only a few people are really seeking these deep truths and open to the reality of them, then the rest of our society is going to remain very sick, unbalanced, and actually headed for its own destruction. The kind of careless attitude that some of our political leaders have around all the scientific evidence for the ecological damage we're doing by continuing to pollute our world and burn fossil fuels, we're really going to get into deep trouble. And it's kind of an interesting twist of all of this modern scientific finding of the eternity of consciousness and soul, because in fact, many of your listeners are souls that are going to be reincarnated as those generations that are going to fall victim to worsening and worsening ecological mayhem. So the golden rule applies throughout. Do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. And this includes realizing that future generations are going to be populated with the souls of those who are alive today. So we're going to reap what we sow. It's high time we took responsibility for the choices.
I also think I can understand why you stuck with the near-death experience, not only because you had that as your primary source of awakening, because it could have been something else that you had, but I think this was meant to be exactly what was, as a scientific background, with all the evidence of your sister that came through in your story as well. You had an uncovery of evidence that only took place in this out-of-body experience that you had, this near-death. I think, unfortunately, there's lots of other fields, and I mentioned even channeling and other fields that have been tainted a little bit with the nonsense of conspiracy slowly creeping into the spiritual market right now, and the destruction that's having on my spiritual community as well. There is so much nonsense and misinformation out there from the UFO community and other communities as well, that it seeps into the spiritual community, and then I don't know, people get so lost in what this all started out for them on the journey of trying to find themselves, and they get lost in the noise of mental masturbation, in a sense, of other things, I think, anyway.
This disinformation thing you bring up, I've been following the same thing, and I've noticed that same infiltration. And what I believe is happening is that the disinformation campaign, whoever is running it, is wanting to populate what they may call gullible populations with this information. And I think it's a mistake to assume that the spiritual community is gullible, because we actually anyone who has a spiritual tradition and has a deep connection within, we know things no one else can know. And that sounds really weird to people outside of the kind of belief system. But when you deeply know that you have an eternal connection to God, and it's not just repeating dogma that you heard from a preacher on Sunday, you're not just repeating it, you have an actual relationship and knowing, you're not as gullible. And it's very interesting to see this disinformation infiltrating, I think, these types of communities, because it is very disturbing to think that we're just a bunch of gullible people falling for some nonsense of spirit ever, being eternal in our souls. That is not a conspiracy, and it's very disturbing when they get lumped together as conspiracies.
And it's something that we cover in a fair amount of detail in Living in a Mindful Universe, having to do with discernment. And
Right.
I would say that Karen was very, very crucial for me, because when I came back from my NDE, I was very ragged around the edges. And I was like, oh my God, it completely devastated my simplistic and false materialist worldview. And yet, how could I replace it and do it in a way that fully honored all of my scientific knowledge of the nature of reality? And Karen was absolutely instrumental in my developing patterns of very rich discernment between kind of the wheat and the chaff of that information that's out there. And I agree with her completely. I think that the real deep spiritual journeyers and seekers are far less gullible than the general population. And part of it, as we encourage in our workshops and in the book Living in a Mindful Universe, is that the universe will give us much of the knowledge we need, but we need to learn how to listen, and that involves going within in meditation and silencing or putting into timeout that little voice of the ego, the little voice in our head. That is not the pathway to knowing. And by acknowledging that for what it is, and then developing our relationship with our higher soul and with that God force, with that co-creative force of binding of love of all of mind, consciousness, and all sentient beings throughout the cosmos, then we can start to actually make progress. And we can trust the universe to give us a tremendous amount of insight there. But it's not necessarily the kind of knowledge you get through rational, logical thinking and just following other people's thoughts and other people's writings and other people's discussion. As we say in Living in a Mindful Universe, we don't expect anybody to take even our word for granted. Go inside. The answers lie within.
Right. Isn't that the main point of your work, guys? Is that you're trying to say to people, don't follow us. We're trying to reignite the power within you. We're trying to show you that you have the power all along. That these things lie within you. That you are the master, or you are the answer that you were looking for. It's all within.
That is exactly it. You've summed it up in a beautiful nutshell, and it is exactly it. We want to empower people to realize that this nonsense that we're insignificant, that there's no purpose and meaning to our lives, sends people into existential despair. Why are we consciously doing that to our fellow humans? Each and every one of us is critical to the entire evolution of consciousness. Each and every one of us getting aligned and becoming who we are. Now, you say there's a lot of people who aren't open to this kind of talk, and it's true, they're not. But some of those same people do understand that they have a purpose, that they have a purpose of being here and a service they can provide. And you don't have to necessarily buy into any spirituality or any of that. You can just simply be who you are and be that presence here on earth, and you are contributing to that whole. Now, those who have a little trouble, finding their purpose and feeling confident like that, it can be very helpful to make that connection and open yourself to a greater part of yourself. But I completely understand when you say this type of languaging and things is very threatening to some people. It sounds like a conspiracy theory. It sounds like a bunch of religious, cultish people trying to, woo you to give them all your money. And that's not the case.
That's not the case. No.
Yes.
That is not the case. If people really understood what cults are, they would not. That would not enter their brain. But unfortunately, there are cults in our field. That's the problem. And
right.
This has been an ongoing problem for a long time that people do not want to talk about in this community. And it's just surprised me how much I've just gone along with it for so long. And it's only these past few weeks, months that I'm like, I just can't do it anymore. You know, I'd rather walk away from this field and go do something else than stay in this field. So what I've decided to do is something I should have done a long time ago, is just become an independent investigative journalist. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing now. Going and having to go not against people, but the stories. And using investigative journalists with evidence there as well to back up why some of these stories are not true. Yeah. And, you know, why me? Well, no one else is going to do it, because most hosts are the problem as well. That it's not only people with mental health illness coming out with stories, it's also the hosts with mental health illness allowing that to happen, because they're just as crazy, some of them, as the people that want to be crazy to come on to get the attention. I'm sorry, but it's true.
Yeah, and you know, it's so interesting, this rise of all this disinformation. Somewhere in there is some truth.
Yes.
Somewhere in there is a truth that needs to come out. But we're never going to find it with all of this disinformation. And that's exactly how the people who want to suppress the information prefer it. And so we're all thrown into this turmoil. And just to hear you talk, I've been feeling the same turmoil around the community that I think should have their act together, and it's like, oh my goodness, it's not the case.
Well, there's no regulatory body. There's no regulatory body in our field. That's the problem as well. There's no regulations we stick by as well to say, look, this is a standard we should uphold. You know what I mean? It's just not there.
Yeah, it's quite a thing going on right now. But we kind of like to call this sort of a collective gift of desperation. And you know, it often we talk about it in terms of the global crises and the kind of the suicide and the economic and the climate and all of this. But I think this collective gift of desperation is affecting all of us, because all of our truths are being kind of questioned right now. And all of us in every community kind of need to step back and take a fresh look at all of the things. Yeah.
You know, when I get emails sent to me from my audience and saying, you know, look, Kev, I love what you're doing with the consciousness, but I've got to say you're completely wrong, because you never cover the other stuff, like the conspiracy side of it, or the other big names like David Wilcock or someone else like him, right? And I'm like, you know, because they say that is part of waking up, that is part of consciousness evolution, the secret space program and all this stuff. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so shocked that that's my audience. I didn't know. And I've just had some big wake-up calls recently, right? So I can understand why you guys have stayed in this field and, you know, kept it within what you're doing. I understand why you didn't want to come on the documentary I'm doing. I totally get it, and I totally support you, right? I see it from a very different perspective right now, and how when you're in something that's good like what you are, you know, you have to use discernment, and that comes back to the discernment that we were talking about, and I'm glad you've put that discernment in your book as well. And I never thought I'd be speaking to you like this, but there is something going on in this community, and maybe it's been going on a long time, but maybe it's at some sort of stage right now where it's just popping slowly, and it's, you know, maybe.
Well, I think that something we try really hard to do is keep everything in our book, and we try to keep everything that we talk about grounded in some kind of science. And this is what helps us. This is why we didn't include in our book, we didn't include the channeling topic, because it's so controversial, and it's kind of less scientifically proven than some of the other categories that we talk about. But we certainly bring along enough evidence to show that there's some validity to the work involved with hypnosis, with also with the past life memories in children, indicative of reincarnation. All of that still stands, regardless of all the silliness going on and the disinformation. This stuff is still real and scientifically based.
Right. And in fact, the scientific community, I would say, is on the verge of the greatest revolution in its recorded history. And this has to do with finally making some sense of what is broadly known as the measurement paradox in quantum physics, which basically points out that mind is fundamental in the universe, that the observing, none of this exists without the observing mind. So we are far more crucial at generating reality than we might think. And this is all about the mind-brain connection. And it's a discussion that's really been going on for probably at least 5,000 years. If you look east and west, spiritual traditions especially getting a head start on much of it. But the last 400 years, the rise of the scientific revolution with its assumption that the physical world was all that exists, which that assumption came tumbling down about 80 years ago with the advent of quantum physics. Quantum physics is the most precise kind of basement level look at the relationship between the physical brain, the physical world, and our knowledge of it. And so that's why quantum physics is so relevant. And what is emerging from the combination of both ongoing experiments in quantum physics that show the reality of consciousness as fundamental in the universe as being the only tenable position, and also all of these developments investigating consciousness, and not only day-to-day mundane consensus reality consciousness, but consciousness involved in dreams, involved in near-death experiences, in shared death experiences, which are just like near-death experiences, except they happen in perfectly healthy people. Also after-death communications, deathbed visions, the past life memories in children we've talked about. All of this is a way of looking at non-local consciousness. That is, all the human experiences that point out that the brain as the physical generator of consciousness in the here and now is not a good model. It does not cover the bigger aspects of consciousness itself. So this is a revolution that I think will make the Copernican revolution, where we move the humanity's notion of the center of the universe from the earth to the sun. I think it'll make Copernican revolution look like child's play. This is a gigantic revolution, but it addresses the very fundamental assumptions of materialist science that have been adopted over 400 years, and that's one of the reasons they've had such trouble letting it all go.
And let me tell you, revolutions, when you're in the middle of them, are not supposed to be easy, smooth, and pleasant. So here we are.
No, they're not.
Here
They're
we
not at all.
are.
They're not. I wouldn't say they are at all. I mean, it's it's funny because this is really weird that we're having this conversation right now, because there's others that have contacted me recently just to say, look, I'm thinking of walking away. It's just getting a bit crazy, some of this stuff that's being pointed out to people, and it's not helpful to the empowerment of people. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love your work. Your work is grounded, as you say. It's scientifically backed and it's helpful. And I think we are going through a revolution. Maybe it's a good thing. Thank God for that, right?
That's all we can think.
I think it's absolutely essential, because we have, that false sense of the kind of sense of irresponsibility that comes from materialism, because scientific materialism is very clear. If it's all just chemical reactions in the substance of the brain of all these subatomic particles, atoms, and molecules following the laws of physics, chemistry, biology, then where in the world would you insert any notion of free will? So that materialist science very proudly tells you we have no responsibility for our decisions. It's all predetermined chemistry, so forget about it. That is not true. The entire universe exists for sentient beings to manifest choices of free will. And the biggest lesson coming to us, as we put out in Living in a Mindful Universe and in many other books of kind of that address a similar topic, is that lesson of love. Near-death experiencers are not unclear about this at all. And even hardcore atheists who go through an NDE come back realizing that love is the binding force of the universe, and it's something we need more of. Likewise, we must take responsibility for those big choices, like about burning fossil fuels and energy. Yes. We are very rapidly killing this planet. Something like 30% of species are now threatened with extinction due to our carelessness around energy and burning of fossil fuels and pollution in general. We have to take stewardship of this planet. This awakening is happening for a reason.
Oh, well, most definitely. And I think with your work, I'll use this quote: "Is this love or not love when it comes to your work?" And I think that is this coming from, is this anger some people are coming from with their work, or is this love or not love? And I think your work does come from love, having just knowing about your work, and obviously having gone through parts of the book as well. And thank you for what you've added there about the stewardship of the planet. That's so important right now. But I think the people that are in power right now, I would say they were needed to produce some change. Because it's not just our community that's going through change. I would say there's a lot of sub-communities going through their own change as well.
Right. You're never going to really change something from where the problem began.
Right.
And so The problem we found ourselves in, to expect our current leaders to solve it all is really unrealistic. But yeah, so new leaders don't necessarily come in the form that we might imagine. And as you just said, some destruction is kind of necessary before some new kind of innovative things can be put into place. But as it's happening, we always tell people that when you're in, say, a personal desperate moment, if you've just been diagnosed with a terminal disease, or if you've lost a young child or something like that, when you're in the middle of that moment, it is so hard. And you pointed that out earlier. It's so hard to go there and see the big picture. It's often 10 years later that you look back. And so hopefully we can all look back at this time 10, 20, 30 years from now and say, oh my God, thank God we went through that. And possibly it could happen.
Max Planck, who is Nobel Prize laureate, one of the fathers of quantum physics, one of my favorite quotes from him is that science progresses one funeral at a time. In other words, he was saying that you just have to wait for the old guard to die off. I don't necessarily go quite that cynical on it, because I think the evidence, once you start looking at the evidence for both the afterlife and reincarnation, the evidence is so overwhelming that I don't think anybody would doubt it once they look at it. So you don't necessarily have to die. But of course, many people have said, or I'd say the occasional materialist scientist has said they'd rather die than have a lot of this parapsychology and evidence of non-local consciousness be true. I can't understand why they are so afraid of it. Maybe it's because it means they do have responsibility for the choices they make in their life, and it's not just all some chaotic, predetermined machine. But we believe that living in a mindful universe and the work we do, and people can visit us at ebenalexander.com and sacredacoustics.com, is all about reversing this crazy death spiral that in many ways has been brought on by the false assumptions underlying materialist science. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a giant fan of science, but I believe in a true open-minded science that takes all the empirical evidence and does not simply sweep those inconvenient facts and experiences under the rug if they don't fit the paradigm. And in fact, that's what is happening now. This revolution we're talking about is the death of the materialist scientific paradigm. But all we're doing is expanding our field of kind of understanding of human influence and the reason for humanity being here, and really the reason for each and every one of us being here. And that's why I think this expanded worldview is so important. And it's a way to enliven our civilization, bring life back. I mean, religious systems that honor oneness, compassion, love, kindness, those aspects of any religious system are in line with what comes out of the NDE world and much of this non-local consciousness study. Any of the kind of conflicting aspects of religion, we're better than the others, we're right, they're wrong. This is not about love, but it's about defeating your enemies in the dogmatic arguments. Those aspects of religion need to go away. All they've done is cause tremendous trouble and conflict over millennia for no good reason whatsoever.
No, guys, I so agree with you, and I know we're almost at the end of our time right now. I just wanted to one other question as well. I'm pretty sure I was watching the Joe Rogan podcast, and they were talking about the near-death experience, and the talk was on the flavor of that. What if it's like having a DMT trip? When the body is shutting down, it releases some sort of DMT into the brain, and that's the effects of what a near-death experience potentially could be.
Well, we discuss the DMT dump hypothesis. I discussed it actually in Proof of Heaven in the appendix. It certainly does not apply in my case, because DMT only acts on receptors in the neocortex. And one of the things that the scientific community is so stunned by is the degree of documented damage to my neocortex and the fact that it could not have responded to DMT at all. Now, the other side of the coin, though, is just like so many other materialist pseudo-explanations for NDEs, DMT does not explain the bigger picture. All the things that really happen, the fact that people often see souls of departed loved ones, even if they don't know that that loved one has yet left the physical plane. And there are many other lines of evidence, but the DMT is just another simplistic materialist attempt to explain NDEs in a physical manner that falls woefully short of explaining all the big features of these experiences by the millions out there in the regular population. So DMT, just because the words might sound somewhat similar, has nothing to do with the fundamental nature of the experience.
Well, thank you for just explaining. I really do appreciate that. Just a question that I had there as well. And just to sum this up then, what would be, for both of you, the most important message of your work right now?
The most important message is this idea of love. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about that, but love is actually the fabric of our universe, and all of us know this. We contributed to a book recently where the question was, what is the meaning of life? And when we got the copy of the book back with our contributions, the man had titled the book Love. Every single person, when they answered the question, the meaning of life, what is the meaning of life, mentioned love in some fashion. All of us know that love is the most important thing. What do we want most in the world? We want to be loved. We want to feel important. We want to be connected with other people. And the tragedy in our world is that we've decided that's no longer important with social media, with the idea that we're just products of chemistry and biology. That's gone away. And love really needs to return as kind of the fabric of our existence. And each and every one of us can access that by going within, developing it from inside, and that attitude of gratitude is absolutely the ideal pathway of finding that love from within.
And I agree completely with Karen. Love is the most important aspect of my journey, of my near-death experience. As I pointed out in Proof of Heaven, it was the deepest scientific truth of that journey. And really, this is what humanity has been challenged to learn for the last many thousand years, is this lesson of love and of kindness, compassion, that we're all in this together. We're here to take care of each other. And we've really lost sight of that in this very misguided kind of false assumption of materialist science, a misinterpretation of what I would say Darwinian evolution. We've really kind of missed the boat on that one with this focus on survival of the fittest, whereas most biologists will tell you that the biggest principles in evolution, as understood in the biological world today, are principles of collaboration, of cooperation. And there are numerous examples of this, not only within a species, but between species. And the more we can learn that and assimilate that into our lives, and realize, just as I came back from my journey discovering, that the thing most missing in this world is a love for ourselves. Remembering the divine connection, that we have tremendous power as individual souls. And it's all about serving as a conduit for that love and bringing it into this world and sharing that kindness, compassion, forgiveness with all fellow beings. That can change this world in one generation. And that is what living in a mindful universe is all about, is helping this world to come to that deeper truth that will help all of us individually and the world at large.
Well, I love what your, can I call it a mission? Is that the right word for it? It's your passion as well, isn't it?
Sure.
It's just what we're living.
Yeah, right.
Every heartbeat is about.
I really love what you guys are doing, and this is a great read as well. I mean, it's an easy to read book, but there is such great content in this book that we've only skimmed over just some ideas in the book as well. So I would highly recommend it. And also obviously we've linked to your previous books, and they're all in the description below with the links back to Amazon. So, guys, I would just like to say thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks so much for having us. I would also invite any of your listeners to go on the free email course on ebenalexander.com. It's your 33-day journey into the heart of consciousness. It's absolutely free, and it'll help people get up to speed on all of these lessons. So I invite all of your listeners to participate at ebenalexander.com in that free course.
And hang in there, Kevin. We're all going to get through this. You're doing all the right things, and we appreciate your work in the world.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate you saying that. Thank you. And I know you're right. You're right. You're right. And everything is perfect just the way it is sometimes.
All right, Kevin.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.